Hi guys, welcome to my channel Lush Foliage. I hope you guys are fine and are safe. So today we are going to be talking about another variety of foliage plant called as the Scindapsus Pictus. Now ideally these are also called as satin pothos because they are botanical cousins of pothos, but they are not exactly pothos. They are a different species called as Scindapsus. I'll put the actual name on the screen. Now what differentiate them from our regular pothos is the variegation on the leaves. You can see they have these heart-shaped leaves which have these silvery grey patches on it, which almost looks very shiny and adds to the visual appeal of this plant. Now the intensity of the variegation will depend from the different species, because this is one of the variety of Scindapsus. There are another 4 to 5 species of this. Now usually these satin pothos, they are basically vines, which means that they latch onto other things what are available around in their surroundings. That can be a pole, trellis or other plants. It can even latch onto the wall or a piece of furniture. Now the way the vine attaches to the surface is through its aerial roots. So instead of letting this plant trail, you can also grow satin pothos in hanging planters, allowing the foliage to cascade down, or you can use any kind of pole, either a moss pole or a coir pole, or you can even make the coir rope and then attach them onto the pole and they will start growing vertically. Now the common names for this is satin pothos, silk pothos, silver pothos, or even silver philodendron, but the actual botanical name is Scindapsus Pictus. Now ideally this plant will grow around 4 to 10 feet in length. Now the satin pothos, or the Scindapsus Pictus as it's called, is a very low maintenance house plant, and it's usually grown by a lot of plant lovers indoors. So you can either grow it indoor or outdoor. But if you're growing it outdoor, ensure that you do not put it out in direct sunlight. It has to be put in either indirect or medium to indirect bright light. So now let's talk a little bit in detail about this plant, starting with light. Now Scindapsus Pictus needs bright light, but it should be indirect. When exposed to full direct sunlight, the leaves will lose the variegation that you see and it will start getting burnt. If you place the plant near a window with direct sunlight, ensure that you're using some kind of filter or probably a curtain to protect it from direct sunlight. The soil is pretty simple. I use the same soil mix as I've said this earlier as well. I'll put the link in the description below. You can check it out how to make the soil mix. I tend to use the same soil mix for this plant as well. So the soil has to be very loose, porous, well draining. Scindapsus do not like to be sitting in wet or soggy soil. So you have to ensure that the pot you're using has to have a drain hole. Now watering is very simple. Whenever you're watering your satin pothos, the key is to avoid overwatering, which will manifest itself by yellowing leaves and the vine will start to wilt. So you will find a lot of yellow leaves if you are going to overwater this plant. So water only when the top 2 inches of the soil feels dry to touch. You can either use your finger and just poke into the soil. If you feel that the soil is dry, upper 2 inches, then you can go ahead and water it. Now ensure that when you are doing this watering, you have to water until the water starts passing through the drain hole. Talking about temperature and humidity, because satin pothos are tropical plants, so they prefer warmth and humidity. Now it will do quite well in the average household humidity indoors. It is not very picky about it, so it will do quite well. That's why it's a very popular house plants indoor. But in case if it is kept under the air conditioning vent, then the leaf tips will turn brown. So ensure that it's not kept directly under the air conditioning vent. The cold air will damage the plant leaves and the foliage. So keep it away from the air conditioning vent, or if you are using a heater, keep it away from the heater. Otherwise the leaves will get affected. Especially when there is a lot of dry air, then the leaf tips will turn brown in color. In case if you are from a place wherein the humidity is very low, then you can use the pebble tray method. I will put that link as well, how to prepare that. Because in case if the humidity is very low, then again the tips will turn brown. Ideally it will do quite well in 50% of humidity. The plant will do quite well without much effect, because I have been growing them outside and my humidity is around 50% during the daytime, and you can see it's still doing quite well. So ideally a 50% to 60% of humidity is absolutely fine. talking about fertilizers, it's not very fussy about fertilizers. If you want to do it, you can do it right now during summers because this is their growing period. So you can go for any liquid based fertilizer. You can do it probably once a month. That's absolutely fine. And during winters, do not add any fertilizers because that's the time they tend to slow their growth down. They do not like very cold weather. So during that time, they slow down their growth. They tend to go slightly dormant. So do not add any fertilizers during that time. Repotting is pretty easy. Now ideally you do not need to repot it quite often because if you're using an 7-inch pot or an 8-inch pot, and if you're using a moss pole, it will grow vertically, and that's all about it. You do not need to repot it quite often because, as I said, during winters they tend to go dormant, and during summers is when they tend to put out a lot of new growth. You can see over here it's putting out a new growth, so ideally it tends to grow vertically. So repotting is not a very frequent thing. Probably you can do it during the summers if you tend to feel that it is getting root bound. Ideally a 5-inch pot or a 6-inch pot is good enough, and you do not need to repot it quite often. Propagation is pretty simple. All you have to do is you can do any cutting because they also tend to put out nodes. If you tend to see that, you can just cut it off beneath, like say over here. As you can see, this is the stem. If I'm going to cut this part off, I will be able to propagate it. Now I'm not going to propagate it because it's just a very small plant. I do not want to do it. So you can always do a cutting, especially if you're going to do it during the summers. It's going to be much better because that's their growing period. So you can just cut below the adjoining stem. You can just cut it just few inches below, just cut it off, and then plant it in your regular potting mix that you use, or you can use the potting mix that I have suggested in the description below. Now talking about pest, ideally a satin pothos is pest free, but at times it does get affected with mealybugs and scale insects. So always do a routine check once a week or once in 2 weeks. If you tend to see any pest, you can go for an organic solution. Now talking about, is this plant toxic? Yes, this plant is toxic to pets, so ensure that you keep it away from them. Either you can grow them in a hanging planter, or you can use a stand and put a pole, and then the plant will grow upwards vertically. If the pet tends to chew on the leaves, then it can be little dangerous for them, especially if the leaves are ingested, then it can be little dangerous. So just keep it away from them. So guys, I hope that this video on Scindapsus Pictus was helpful to you. If it was, please hit the like button. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to it. Until then, take care, stay safe, and keep propagating.